Hey, there's Jackson and Greg popping on and off. Oh, there he is.
There's Robert popping off. We get to hear you pop.
What are we doing now?
We're wanting you to tell us about.
All your people will leave by the time we get moving.
We want you to tell us about that trip through Israel during the 7-Day War.
That's right.
6-Day War.
I didn't go to Israel during this. I went after the 7-Day War, 6-Day War. I went afterwards, and I told you I was able to go to East Jerusalem, and I went up on the Mount of Olives, and I told you I found my grandfather's grave there that the Arabs had thrown down. And when I came there later on to do my doctorate, my wife and I refurbished it with some folks there, so it's back up on the Mount of Olives. I shouldn't say anything; they'll go throw it down again. But in any case, that was very exciting to me. Anyway,
Are you wanting questions?
and as far as the rest goes, sure, I'll take any question you want. Carry on.
Anybody have a question?
Can you hear me?
Very well. Very well.
Okay, good. Let's carry on. All right, let's go.
Well,
you got some visual too? Yeah,
I got it. We got everything. You got more
good.
light.
All right, that's good.
Much better light tonight.
I put some light for you. Yeah, I put a lamp here next for you because you were complaining.
How about the New Jerusalem? The prophetic passages in the New Jerusalem. Have you looked at it?
Well, no, in the New Jerusalem. Where Jesus, what did I do with that? Did I have it here? Hold on, let me have a look. I hate to get up, but I'm looking back at me here. I can see it here anywhere. But, let's see. Be right back.
This is a book of poetry that he wrote as he was going through, and some is like biblical prophecy. And I wish I had one here. We could read one. You'd see what I'm talking about.
If you want one, we have boxes of them still.
No, I don't. I think they're all gone, except maybe 5.
Yeah, maybe 5.
Yeah, I'll be glad to send you one if there's some left.
Musings of a traveling scholar or budding scholar. As he traveled around, he wrote some. The title is something like that.
The title's the New Jerusalem, and he left it on the shelf for 50 years.
All right, here's a copy of the New Jerusalem, okay? And there's me when I was a young whippersnapper sitting in front of the Acropolis when I first went to the Middle East. I think then I was 21 years old. There's some poems that I wrote at that time. I don't know. Let's see. Look in the index here.
There's one.
See what I can that relates to that period here.
About the next to the last one is the one that's like biblical prophecy.
Yeah. Okay. The red flowers on the road to Jerusalem, on the hills of northern. Okay, 105 to 261, I think. Let's see, 105. Oh, you mean the prophecy at the end? Oh yeah, and afterward on the 6-Day War. Yeah, I wrote these poems after the 6-Day War, and so I figured I'd put them as an appendix to these because this is much later. This book was written in around 1960 to 62, and these poems were written in 67. So here's one, the Tiran Crisis, April 14th. 67. I saw 2 children playing today, and one was making the other's passage impossible, challenging him, confronting him, barring him, and then running after him. Is this not the plight of the Jews throughout the centuries? Everyone running after him, challenging him, confronting him, and then running after him again? So that was for the prelude. Then I wrote these words after the UN Security Council debate, May 24th, 1967. And where shall we go? To America, you say? To anywhere. We don't care where, but we are done fleeing. We are done running away. So that goes on for several pages. But I tell you this, I swear it, that it be upon my heart, as the Lord has engraved us upon his palms of his hands. If you let us down now, as you have every other time, and ours the most importune of paths, for your own individual, separate, and picayune motifs, I curse you, and my curse shall ring down the ages. For none of you shall escape the fiery and horrendous fate you reserve for us, not one of you. And you shall all tread the path you have condemned to tread before you. And hear my words, hear them, as you heard all my brothers before me, to whom you have put so much faith, as you heard Moses, or Musa's blessing and his curse. For if you do this to us now, this is the UN security debate, when we are only the remnant left, I swear that not one of you shall escape a fiery and horrific death worse than anything you have reserved for us. And one final word before I'm done, and hear it so that now you know. This time let there be no mistake, for this time we shall fight, for we are the remnant. We shall fight to the last man, as we did in the Warsaw Ghetto, and at the time of Bar Kokhba, as we did it on the fortress of Masada. For it shall not be so easy to dispose of us now. But I say these things mainly for your own souls rather than our own. For the Holocaust which you have inflicted and intend to inflict upon us shall itself be inflicted upon you. That's quite a nice little piece about while the UN is debating what to do in Palestine.
Were you
And
familiar with
the main part, June 5th?
Were you familiar with the Qumran material when you wrote that?
Obviously, I knew some of it, yeah, and Masada and so on. I wasn't an expert, but I had read it through. June 5th, 1967, on the invasion, the outbreak of the war, and it starts, fight you bastards, fight like hell. We are avenging the wrong done us 20 centuries ago at the hands of the Romans. Without that, anyway, it goes on like that. Fight you bastards. We are making a new beginning. We're doing the impossible and showing the world it can be done. So I continue with that with that theme. And then finally with the victory. Horse and rider has the Lord overthrown in the desert. A new song of Miriam. That's in the when Miriam dances when the Pharaoh is overthrown. Horse and rider has the Lord overthrown in the desert. Horse and rider has he overthrown in the Sinai, leaving their charred bodies to decompose in the burning sun. Tank and tankman has the Lord thrown down in the desert, twisted metal and rotting flesh, leaving the burned-out hulks, the torn treads, the shattered turrets, the scorched flesh of their combatants lying in the shifting sands, the blistering sun, where first he delivered the law unto Moses, his commandments to the rest of the world. 2. Horse and rider has the Lord overthrown in Sinai, tankmen and tank crew, and with his powerful right arm he has swept the rows of their empty jet aircraft off their runways as his screaming jets bore down out of the north and west into the early morning sun as they stared incredulously, shattering their hopes with rolling pinpoint explosions, leaving the ruined metal tubes of their new jet aircraft in little piles of twisted wreckage and oil slicks along the sides of runways and villages and cities around the whole of the Arab world. Horse and rider as the Lord thrown down in Sinai, tank and tankman by the shores of the Red Sea, twisted centurions and broken metal swept away in the roar of the backed-up waters returning, corpses and rotting flesh as he left behind in the desert to once more reaffirm his will to the rest of the world. Call them from the east, call them from the west. I shall gather them from the north. I've read Ezekiel here. To the south I shall say, hold not back. It is the Lord of hosts who speak. I shall gather them up from all the nations of the earth and return them to this land. So stand aside, all ye nations of the earth, lest you get burned in the burning. For the Lord has commanded it. He has commanded the gates of his holy city, Jerusalem, be flung open before the face of his homeless refugees, and bid them enter. Rebuild the ruined buildings, rebuild the waste places, make the desert bloom. The Lord has charged his people after an exile of 2,000 years, after numerous tribulations and sufferings and endless trials and persecutions, to return and repossess the land, repossess the waste places, repossess the desert, the land he promised unto their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whom you all know. So it goes on like that. As you can see, it's a little angry. Hello?
Not exactly PC, I would say.
I mean, I can read you some more if you want, but it's pretty nasty.
You sound like one of those Qumran zealots for the Torah.
Well, I was pretty zealot, as you see. I'm very, very zealot. Let's get to the end of this. I'll see if I can find the end. That's just sort of. And I say unto you Arabs, the sons of Ishmael, Esau, and Ham, be calm. Let your tempestuousness subside, lest you too be effaced from the earth. For you are only the servants of your brother Israel and your half-brother Isaac. To them is gone the blessing, and to you all the rest. Unless you wish more of the curse that you have so already drunk so deeply of these many centuries, be generous and magnanimous towards them. Be gentle and protect them, as indeed, being older and stronger by far, you should. For I have given the land unto them as an eternal resting place for my glory forever. To them I have given the stones, the hills, and the religious places, and to you all the rest, all the seas of the desert, under which lie such vast pools of oil in the other lands, and all the wealth. For Ishmael shall indeed be a great nation, and the father of many princes. But you must put aside your anger, your pride, your venom, at these your younger brothers, who have been chastened in the fires of affliction and kneeled in the furnaces of destruction. Work with them and cooperate with them, for only through their hand and their blessing will I allow your land to blossom, your wilderness to bloom, your wastelands to regain their fertility. They are your charge and your legacy to protect, but only through their inheritance will you be blessed. Indeed, you shall once again become a mighty people, but only through their blessing will yours be fertilized. So cherish them, keep them, turn your anger and your hearts away from them, and put it to more constructive use. So you see, actually, I've never read that out loud before, and that was written maybe, 50 years ago. So it's fun to read it now, not having ever read it out loud.
You had one in there also that was kind of
that book, huh?
You had one in there that was a counterpoint to that called America. That
what?
You had one in there that's a counterpoint to that one that I think you called America.
Yeah, there's an America here, but I don't know what page it's on. It's like looking through the America I Call Upon You. Here it is. This was written in Paris when I was, it was at the time of the Kennedy election. America I call, so that's 1960. America I call upon you. And if that time has ever come, it has come now, it is on thee now. And if thou art to live or die, the time is now, the choice is thine. Oh yes, thou shalt endure as others have endured, all things in fact endure. It is not this I thee adjure, for even rocks they too endure. But if it be thy spirit which shall flourish and go on, if it is this now failing, yes, flare up once more, light away, that time is now. For an old error now falls away, unseen it slips so silently, no, others cannot see that it is done. 15 years have passed, you see it's 1960, since the last great war, but I tell thee it is dying now fading out. Anyway, it goes on like that. And so on. Talks about the assassination of Lincoln and so on and so forth. Let me see what towards the end what it says. But America, I tell thee, that time's now done, that time's now gone, that time is past, those men are done. 15 years have passed since the last great war. De Gaulle now sits upon the throne of France. The men and generals made in that poor time, they made their ascent, their time is gone. A new race of men is now approaching. Heraldic, I proclaim it, a new era. What is past, no more to come. No longer Europe or America, no longer every man his own backyard, but now all the world. 500 years it wasn't coming. 500 years we suffered so, and only now we see it dawning. No more the man in search of spoil, no more the man in search of plunder, but a new man. Once more the giving, once more the honor, once more the men of Lincoln's blood. For no more can petty men lean of spirit uphold your honor. No more the bargainers, no more the public spoilers. Ye the new land, ye the hope of man. Now you the liberated ones, your patriots now are coming. That which was nurtured deep within your soul, you still the guardian of that soul. Men like Patrick Henry and Nathan Hale, men who will fight not just for you, but all the world, and to live and die for all the world, to give to all the world. So every man may live, not simply eat, so all men can hold up their heads, not sell themselves for food or a plowshare, but breathe freely, breathe easily. Anyway, that's for if you are to live or die, the time is now, the choice is thine. If you are to raise yourself, pull yourself once mighty from out your slumber, the choice is thine. For the whole world awaits you, the whole of man abides your coming. And if you are to stumble, you stumble now. And this is the task I do proclaim thee. This is the task to which thou art called. For you shall either forget your self-enriching ways and lift up your spirit, or fall away, die out, no more the child excused. So that's this book. That's your America I call upon you. You like that one, huh, Jackson?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, it seemed to me like in a very real, almost literal way, you're talking about United States as being the New Jerusalem itself, because that was the place where
that one was written before the one about the 6-Day War and stuff. That one was written, as I say, in 1960. I mean, I was about 23 years old then, and the 6-Day War one was written really when I was 30 years old. So some time had passed,
Yes,
since then, and I think I had grown a little more mature.
I think you saw America as the refuge.
Etc.
You saw America as the refuge place for the Jews and other people that were in persecution.
I don't think I was talking about the Jews in that one. I was just talking about Americans, period. I mean, it was the Kennedy era, and, Kennedy was running, and we all thought that he was going to do important things, and it turned out he didn't. And, I worked on his campaign, and then at the last moment, I came back from Europe, worked on his campaign. At the last moment, I refused to vote. And my mother said, "What? You worked on this man's campaign? You spoke on the streets, and now you're not voting?" I said, "No, I don't like his stand on Cuba. I don't like what he said in the debates. I don't like the idea of invading Cuba and all this sort of thing. I'm not going to vote." And she was astonished that I was a poll watcher. I was watching the poll, but I didn't vote. I didn't, and I left the country after that. And when he was killed 3 years later, it didn't surprise me. I didn't feel good, happy, but it didn't surprise me. Those things, I didn't see anything good come following that at all. Even though Johnson was an idiot and got into the Vietnam War and never should have, he did, but Kennedy started the Vietnam entrance with the special forces he sent there. Johnson wasn't sophisticated enough to deal with that, but I like the social things Johnson did. And I haven't liked much since.
You didn't really want to turn to Nixon then in 60.
No, I didn't turn to Nixon. No, I'm afraid not. But, it turns out he probably wasn't as bad as we all thought he was. But we're not talking about politics here. I thought we were talking about more interesting things like the Bible, the scrolls, the Middle East, Jerusalem, things like that.
Can I throw one more red herring in before we turn to that?
Sure.
For some reason, the name doesn't come to me, but the American hero that was in the armed forces and sent around the world to work in different situations where there was no hope of winning. What was that fellow's name? Whittaker? You dedicated.
I don't know the person you're talking about.
You dedicated a book to this guy. I think it was a Marine, and they sent him.
I dedicated a book to him, really?
Yeah, you wrote a poem to his name. He's a very interesting character. We would probably recognize him if I could think of it. Whittaker.
Well, you know more about what I've written than I do. I'll tell you that. Wasn't someone called Webster? That's for sure.
Well, maybe it'll come to me.
Maybe.
All right.
What else now?
Liz has one for you. Liz McGee. I'll convey it to you. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, we've been all studying for years the Enoch Scrolls, and we know there's a composite document, and it's pretty easy to take out the 5 or 6 different parts of it. We just want to know what you think about the consistency of it.
But I'm not a great expert on the Enoch Scroll, I must tell you. And I've never studied it carefully. So I wouldn't want to give an opinion of it. But, I have a dim view of most of those documents in terms of, the minute you're attributing something to Enoch, you're living in a, supernatural universe. So, I don't know what the author is trying to convey in those kinds of in those kinds of presentations, but obviously it's nothing to do with anyone called Enoch.
Oh, tell us a little more about that.
Well, there's nothing to tell.
You mean to say that Enoch might not have written that book?
Come on, you must be kidding me. Enoch, I mean, we don't even know if he's an historical, he's an almost supernatural being in their literature. He's a literary figure. Once again, it's the problem of literature and history and documents. I mean, you can't credit a document in the name of a supernatural character.
Well, Enoch is in vogue.
It would be like my trying to attribute some document to, let's say, Abraham or someone like that. I mean, okay, Abraham's even a little more historical maybe than Enoch, maybe. But we have to, David, okay, when you get down to David's time, you're in more historical period, and the Psalms quite possibly can be attributed, some of them, to David. But I wouldn't want to sort out which ones. So David's a real historical character, so we can relate to him.
Well, these days there are more and more disaffected Christians that understand the books of Enoch as being not only written by Enoch in the antediluvian age, but they understand them as infallible as well. And it's pretty hard for me personally to try to dissuade people. It's almost like you've got to find the historic markers in there, point them out as to when those things happened, and point out the huge difference in the dating between, say, 250 BC and 4500 BC or whatever would be.
Well, look, we don't have any documents from 4500 BC that have come down to us in any reliable way. And that would be almost unimaginable. But I mean, that's like saying you have a document from the Pharaoh so and so in 2500 BC or something like that he wrote. I mean, this is an actual book of literature from a supernatural being like Enoch. These are symbolic books written by human beings like you and me, much, 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 much later, who are trying to get attention for their works by attributing them to well-known, important, supernatural, overpowering beings. But those overpowering beings were not writing either Hebrew or Aramaic or something like that. They were not writing. They're just characters in the literature.
Well,
it's like trying to attribute a document to I don't know, one of Shakespeare's characters in his plays or something.
What about, say, Psalm 104, the creation psalm, as compared to the hymn to the sun of 1,000 years or more earlier?
Well, you better recite that poem to me because I don't have it in front of me.
Well, they say that they found something so similar to
what's Psalm 104 like? What's basically, what does it sound like? And
it talks about the blessings of oil, blessings of wine, the staple blessings for all people, and there go the ships, and it's all about creation, and Behemoth and Leviathan are swimming, playing in the water.
Well, these are like, so that you think people say it's similar to something from Egyptian culture, you're saying?
Well, what they told me back at Emory, and it seemed quite likely, is that the hymn to the sun written by Pharaoh Akhenaten, or so they think, that was found on a wall there at Amarna.
Yeah,
is
right.
Okay. I think probably the first year I was in, they had us compare those two texts. So it looks like...
I don't have an opinion about that because I haven't studied either of them, but I will say if the hymn to the sun is on one of the walls of Akhenaten's tomb, then I think it would be credible that it was written in his either under his supervision or by his person or something associated with his being, or they wouldn't put it there. So that I can credit. But if you want to say that there's one of the Psalms of David or something that echoes that particular hymn, that's fine. It's just that whoever was putting those things into Hebrew later on, obviously, if that's the case, was familiar with that tomb and rendered a facsimile of it into Hebrew. I don't understand what the problem is there.
Oh, it's no problem. Except that we're looking at a psalm attributed to David.
Oh,
really is kind of.
These psalms weren't. No real scholar thinks all these psalms were written by David. I mean, that's an attribution to give them credibility, to give them prestige. Some of them we hear that David sings in the history, that he plays the lute and so on and so forth. So therefore, since singing and psalm type of activity was credited to him, so the psalms are probably the hymns of the temple, the hymns that were sung and recited in the Jerusalem temple. So they were then attributed to David. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean David wrote them all.
Okay, let's stay on the same vein. Let's go back to Abraham. One of the kernels of Israeli faith is a phrase that comes up several times in Genesis. My father was a wandering Aramaean.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, you know that one. I'm wondering if we could actually, that might be something we could attribute to Abraham himself through his descendants, something that might be as genuine as anything we can find on somebody who lived 1800 BC. You think there's any?
Well, some snippets of material may have come down by word of mouth. There wasn't any writing to speak of that we know of at that time. I don't think the Hebrew language was being written or even maybe not even used. But the point is that, verbally, oral transmission, some snippets of things attributed to Abraham may have come down like that. So they were incorporated into the literature. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that he actually said or said that, but it fits in with the texture of the document that they are putting together and writing. But look at Jackson. This is not my field of expertise. I'm not, I haven't been working on the Old Testament in any serious way, except teaching in a university a bit. But I haven't written on it or anything. I work on early Christianity and the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you want to talk about those subjects, I'm prepared to talk in an intelligent, serious manner.
Oh, okay.
Everything else that I have to say about these other subjects is really rather amateurish.
Let's throw one into your court. But first, Mark Heston, one of Charlton's descendants, has a question for you.
Yeah, Ten Commandments.
Ten Commandments.
So yeah, it's kind of intriguing for me. Can you hear me, Robert? Can you hear me?
Probably not. I'll convey it unless you want to come up here and talk in there.
Yeah, Jackson will convey it because I don't hear any of these things from outside your environment.
Mark's coming on up.
All right, well, fine. I see a person.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, Robert?
Yeah, here.
Oh, okay. So, I was somewhat intrigued with this idea of James, the brother of Yeshua, being the teacher of righteousness. Is there anything that in the scrolls relevant to his brother? I mean, what do we have?
Well, look, first of all, you have to read all the scrolls yourself. You have to read all the literature about James yourself. You can't answer a question like that in a simple sentence. The point of the matter is that if you know the literature about James, and I covered in my James, the brother of Jesus, I brought down a clean copy of it this time. Here's a nice clean copy here. James, the brother of Jesus book. That's all covered very, very, very carefully. you know that James was surnamed in the early Christian literature Justus, Justus. And in English and in Hebrew, that means, that's Latin, that means the righteous one. The righteous one. So right there you have a link to the righteous teacher.
Oh, yeah,
if he's called the righteous one,
right,
he clearly has a doctrine of righteousness.
Yeah, no, I'm not looking. I'm not looking.
I think that he has something in common with the teater of righteousess. Well, they're being called by similar names.
Well, no,
so of course,
hey, Robert, hold on. I'm not taking issue with the idea that James.
I know you're not.
I'm not. I don't mean.
You're saying, how do I know it?
No, I was just looking for a paragraph on any semblance relevant to James's brother in the scrolls that, from your perspective, that's.
Why are you looking for Jesus always? Why do we always have to look for Jesus? Suppose Jesus wasn't the most important person at that time. Suppose, in fact, that only came later when some people in Rome wrote these weird, fantastic gospels that have literature is a very powerful thing. The Homer's Odyssey, Homer's Iliad survives a good, 2,500 years.
Well, you know what okay,
they're more powerful than history. They're easier to understand. So you speak about Jesus. There's churches. There's this. There's that.
Right.
It turned out that Jesus was not the most important person at that time.
Well, you know what I find funny is the fact that so if the Romans are the only ones that have contrived the Gospels, then how come
in Rome, not the Roman, people connected to the Roman Empire like Paul.
Well, that's fair enough. Okay, so why don't we have more historians talking about this in relevant to the Roman Empire, talking about this supposed false prophet? Then we don't have very much.
Well, I can't help it if scholars are afraid to talk about these things.
Well,
most scholars I know don't.
If they're going to promote Gospels, they're going to have historians, accounting and verifying their false gospel, right? I'm not saying
anything's false. Literature is not false. Literature is something different than history. You don't say it's false. There is no true gospel of Jesus as far as I am aware anywhere. As such, there are works of literature, people like you say who wrote Enoch and things, people trying to fashion a picture as they understood or it came down to them. The gospels we have are clearly from a Roman Pauline perspective. They've been totally Romanized, as I've said in all my works. They are almost 180 degrees opposite of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, you couldn't know that if you didn't read the Dead Sea Scrolls. So once you read the Dead Sea Scrolls and see how messianic they are, then you have to decide, well, who are we going to credit? A Messiah-type figure presented in the Dead Sea Scrolls or a Messiah-type figure presented in a Paulinized Roman gospel form? And to me, the answer is obviously, being of Jewish background, I think I'm able to see what Jewish literature looks like. Mm-hmm. And the scrolls are obviously Jewish literature. They're not very attractive. They're not beautiful. They're not as beautiful as the Gospels. And we don't have churches all over the place, dedicated to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But that's because you didn't have a Roman Empire promoting them. And then a church based in Rome that built churches all over the Western world, promoting them for 1,600 years. What do you expect?
Okay.
What would you expect that these wouldn't be people's version of truth? That doesn't mean they have anything to do with any truth in Palestine. They're just very attractive literature.
Okay, well, I can see you're trying to be very objective. Now, there's 4 different kinds of Essenes, right? We have the Zealots, we have the Sicarii, and I don't know what the other.
Well, that's what Hippolytus says, yes.
And so,
one observer says that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So consequently, of those 4, so you're saying that
I don't think that's right. I don't think there are 4 different kinds of so-called Essenes. The problem is we have Josephus, who's a Roman propagandist too, and he gives us a faulty picture of the Essenes because he knows that the Essenes were involved in the war against Rome. If we take the literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls as the literature of the Essenes, what are you going to make about the war scroll? promotes a war, a final apocalyptic war against all evil on the earth. I was saying last time, but I didn't get to it, that the people in the camps were not stupid. They purified themselves. That's what I was telling about, pure, not being married and so on and so forth, not being involved with women, etc. They thought that brings impurity, etc. They purified themselves and made themselves totally holy, what they thought was holy anyway. We may not agree, because they had to make the camp so pure that the heavenly host would come down from heaven, the angelic heavenly host would come down from heaven and join them in their camps. Now that's an incredible idea. What kind of lunatic would think of such a thing? Yes, it's an incredibly maniacal idea, but it's actually very, very beautiful. And they gave their life for this. They thought, they knew they couldn't win by themselves, but they thought if they were totally pure and they had these pure camps, the heavenly angels would come down. And why couldn't the heavenly angels come down into impure camps? Because as far as they thought, the heavenly angels could not abide human impurity. So all the camps had to be totally pure. And they didn't think they were going to go out and fight the might of Rome by themselves. That they didn't think that. They thought that the heavenly host was like an atomic bomb, was like having 50,000 hydrogen bombs. That's what the heavenly host was like in their view. A supernatural fighting force that would totally annihilate the Roman Empire. We can see that they were stupid, but that's a very, very beautiful idea.
Okay, well, you know, I've taken occasion to go through the Greek Josephus and found some rather disturbing 180-degree concepts in respect to the English.
We know that Josephus was a spy. We know that he was a turncoat.
No, I'm sorry. What I'm saying is,
we know that he was doing all kinds of things, but you can read through the lines of Josephus. You can reverse Josephus. The point is he gives us the data. We're not talking about his point of view and how he spins it. You can turn it around the other way. And that's what's so interesting about having all that data. I don't think we have any period as well documented in history up until the Renaissance as well documented as the period Josephus does, because we have a Josephus who wrote encyclopedic works. They don't have to be spun the way we want them. They don't have to be totally accurate, but you can go through them and reverse them, knowing what his sympathies were and what he was trying to do and who he was trying to portray negatively and who he was trying to portray positively. So not so.
Okay, well,
I'm sorry. Is if you come to a passage that looks funny and peculiar, it probably is funny and peculiar. So you turn it around and you reverse it. But the point of the data is there, and you can work on it.
Well, you know what I find interesting is when I was looking at the
brain.
What's that?
You have a brain. You can look at something and you can tell if it needs some retouching. You can tell if this has been, like you said, this looks funny to you. Well, good. You're on the first step then.
Well, what I'm trying to tell you,
make it right.
What I'm trying to share with you, Robert, is the fact that when I was reading it, I was doing a Greek translation. In other words, I had to take a Greek Josephus, and I did a retranslation of it, and I was finding doctrinal points that were opposing Roman Catholic concepts. And so I was like, wow. We got something.
What precepts?
I have
Roman Catholicism didn't even exist at that time. I don't know what you're talking about.
We came up with opposing Catholic concepts by retranslating the Greek of Josephus in comparison to the English translation of it, which was compatible.
Well, translators are notoriously have their own sympathies and are often very inaccurate, and it's nice that you can read the original Greek. I was listening to someone last night who was talking about reading the original Syriac of some of the Gospels, for instance, and having a totally different impression. It's always good to be able to read something in their original tongue. But I don't know what your problem is. Josephus gives us a huge amount of data. That's very helpful. That's all.
Yeah, no, all I'm trying to portray is the idea that
everything in it is perfect.
Not everything's
perfect. I know that. Why do I call him a rotter? Why did the people of Jerusalem throw stones at him when he came out to try to ask them to surrender to the Romans. He honestly portrays that in his autobiography. Now, if you think that's phony, then I think you don't perceive well.
No,
That is
I
honest.
wouldn't doubt that.
That's honest. That he's proud that they throw stones at him because he hates them. He hates the revolutionaries, and he shows himself honestly as being a very a huge con man and a very hateful person. But that's all right. We get a lot of material from him, and it helps us. And so much material, we have an encyclopedic picture of that time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Robert.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think the problem with you is you're just beginning. You haven't read widely enough. You haven't read the scroll documents. You haven't read all, you just started with a little bit of Josephus in your Greek course, and there's some things that upset you. That's just a beginning. You haven't put all these materials together in a useful manner. So what I was saying about James, how do we historicize James? We got to take all the material from the early church sources, from the apocryphal gospels, from Paul's letters, from Eusebius, from all these church sources, and build up a credible picture of this person. And how do we compare him with the righteous teacher? Well, in fact, at that time, no one even knew there was a righteous teacher. We only learned there was a righteous teacher since 1948. And we didn't even know that there were that we should compare them with early Christianity, because all the scholars were saying these are Essenes, these are pre-Christian documents. They were running to make sure these were pre-Christian documents, when in fact, as it turns out, we can actually correlate them with first century dates, and they were trying to put them into the 2nd century BC. Can you imagine a group that's supposed to be anti-Maccabean, that has everything in common with the Maccabees, that is zealous like the Maccabees, that's willing to fight like the Maccabees, and we're supposed to think that their antagonism is directed against the Maccabees and not the Herodian establishment? I cover all these things in my Maccabees, Zadokites, Christians, and Qumran, and books like that, and I can't do it on a television. On a televised discussion, but if you'd read some of these things, I think you'd be in a better position to make some evaluations.
One notice at Amazon,
Okay, Jackson, what else?
One notice at Amazon, or one of these bookstores that I copied, was they have your book as Maccabees Sodomites instead of Zadokites.
Well, so they make a mistake, I mean, what am I supposed to do about that? Stand on my head?
Oh, no, I thought that's not the name of this book.
We know what the book is supposed to be called. I mean, that some bureaucrat wrote something inaccurate. I mean, that doesn't surprise me.
Do you think you could take one more question? I have a burning question.
Sure, go ahead.
Anybody else? Oh, some of us have looked over for the last 20 years a book called Beyond the Essene Hypothesis by Gabriele Boccaccini. Well, I believe he's something like the head of the Scrolls team now or something. But what he does in this book is to sort out the various texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and what he wants to tell us is that the Qumranites wrote certain ones of these that were xenophobic and nationalistic and all this, but they also carried along the books that were previously written that actually belonged to a pre-Qumranite sect like the Enochians and so forth. And he sets out about five...
Well, I mean, Boccaccini wrote in the early days of the Qumran literature. He's not a more present-day writer. See, there are some books like Daniel and probably Enoch and all those kinds of books that belong to a forerunner group. Why not? I don't see anything wrong with that, and that's not just his view.
Well, it's a good thing.
View. I'm more interested. I'm more interested in the latter literature of the group than the early literature, in terms of trying to hook it up to first century events.
Well,
it
this
doesn't
book,
matter what, for instance, the Enoch book says or Daniel says. They have very little to do with the first century events. But if you look at a document like the Habakkuk Pesher, and
absolutely.
Pesher means commentary on Habakkuk, that's talking about real historical events of the present moment. And Paul is very interested in the prophet Habakkuk also. The righteous shall live by his faith. And you find that interpreted both in the Christian Pauline corpus and in the Qumran corpus. And you can be sure that the righteous by his faith is connected in the Qumran literature to the righteous teacher.
Well, I've been teaching these fragments from the book Dead Sea Scrolls Uncovered.
Well, you're reading bits and pieces of things, and I really can't discuss.
Well,
your
I'm only
education.
saying that it makes perfect sense that the internal evidence points to first century. I think that the icing on the cake is the Habakkuk.
Some of the material is first century. Look, I have material in my library from the Renaissance. That doesn't mean that everything that I have in my library was written at the period of the Renaissance, nor does it mean that everything I have in my library was written right now. You have to have some intelligent insight, and you sort out what looks contemporary and what looks a little older. That's just normal. No one who studies the Dead Sea Scrolls does any different. The main dispute is, were all the scrolls written, are the scrolls anti-Maccabean? Are they written before the first century, and so on? And all the early scholars, probably Boccaccini too, were trying to stick them in the 2nd century BC. And they were doing that because they didn't want them to hurt Christianity. They knew in their souls that if they let them get out of the 2nd century BC, the whole picture would be reversed. And that Cecil Roth at Oxford was one of the first who started to turn it around. And that was in the late 60s that he started doing that. And I can't deal with what the Dead Sea Scroll establishment thinks, because they misinterpreted the scroll. And someone like Frank Moore Cross, who was a very famous Harvard scholar and directed most of the translation of the scrolls, had no historical sense whatsoever. He was an intelligent person, but he didn't know any history at all, at least no modern history in the sense of the 1st, 2nd century AD. His expertise was 9th century BC. So, are we going to rely on these kind of people? Well, the average person doesn't know what to make of it, so he or she does. But if you have any sense or brains, then you start to think for yourself.
They've laid a patina on people now who are trying to understand the scrolls with their books about certain things coming out of 2nd and 3rd century BC. Well,
they didn't know they were doing this. This was just their psychological thrust, that they felt obliged to do it like this. They weren't trying to. After a while, it became a kind of coordinated effort, because they didn't want the thing to break out into something different than their original interpretation. Their pride was at stake. And so on. So they had a whole what we call the consensus. That whole consensus, and we talk about the consensus all of the time. Well, Jackson, can we go to someone else, please?
Beg your pardon?
Jackson?
Yes.
Can we go on to someone else, please?
Sure. What do you want to do?
I can't answer any more of this gentleman's questions, because he's asking questions that are like, beginner's questions from his classes that I'm just, that have nothing much to do with what I'm trying, with what I've written, about, or what I'm known for, and it doesn't. It's just basically something he should ask his teacher at college.
Well, we're going to have Commander Lee, throw him out of the room for asking such stupid questions.
No, don't throw anyone out. I'm just saying I can't deal anymore with his questions, okay? Okay. He should ask his professors those questions.
So the proposition is that before there was a Qumran messianic movement, the scrolls, when you break them into categories, indicates that there was an Enochian movement before that maybe used an Enochian Pentateuch.
Well, what's that got to do with what was happening in the first century?
Well, it has this to do with it.
You're talking about a movement maybe in the 5th and 4th centuries.
Well, we're
BC.
thinking about
What is
Hippolytus.
that? I don't even think it's in the Maccabean period. It's probably a pre-Maccabean period.
Oh.
The Palestine that we're dealing with is after the Maccabees revolted against the Greeks.
I'm only saying
I
that.
don't see, if you want to talk about the pyramids, or you want to talk about the pharaohs, or you want to talk about Imhotep, or someone like that, fine, go ahead. But that's nothing to do with the period that we're all focused on.
Okay, we'll drop this. I was just going to say, Hippolytus, you gave us that text so we could see that there are various types of.
That text. All Hippolytus is doing in that text is saying that, okay, a lot of people go around saying because of Josephus there were some Essenes like this and there were some Essenes like that. If you want to judge the Essenes, and we have the literature now, look at the literature. And if you see anything like these so-called peaceful Essenes who are pro-Roman and turn the other cheek in the literature, that would be very interesting for me to know, but I don't see anything like that.
All right, let's take Philo then. Take Philo.
Josephus was trying to do, these were peaceful Essenes who loved everybody, and all they did was meditate and things like that, and they were not interested in politics, and they were retiring. Well, that is totally not true of the Essenes we're dealing with in the present era of the
we move over then. We move over from Josephus to Philo, and his talk about therapeutai.
Philo.
You call it Philo? Yes. Well, my teachers call him
Philo.
Philo. Like Obama says, Pakistan. They call him Philo.
Well, I can't help what Obama.
Okay, I'm with you. Philo.
I mean, we all know that Philo is. Everybody knows that Philo is pronounced Philo. I'm just trying to help you.
Don't forget that. It's Philo. Yeah. Okay.
Philo is right. Yes, Philo.
Well, he's Hellenistic, of course, but his descriptions are not all that unlike that of Josephus. I wonder if they're talking about somebody completely different than the so-called Dead Sea Scroll people here, because they certainly don't match up, either one of them. Now, we can see that Josephus has probably mashed up his stuff on purpose, but what would Philo be trying to hide? Or
Well, I think I've covered that in my books. I can't remember exactly all the things Philo says about the Essenes. I don't think he has a very detailed description of the Essenes in the same manner that Josephus does. But he mentions them, but they may have been the Essenes he knew in Egypt. I don't know if Philo knows anything about what's going on in Palestine.
all right, can I ask you again?
And when did Philo visit Palestine? I mean, he lived in the first century, but I'm not sure he had any historical knowledge of what was going on in Palestine in the 1st and 2nd centuries BC.
I don't believe that he ever went to Palestine.
And he probably read his Josephus also,
Though I think it was his nephew that was the governor of Syria over there, but I think that was after he died.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to ask you if you knew anything about Amarna.
No.
Okay. That was a burning question about the Onion Temple era. Do you know of any sources?
Look, Jackson, you guys are going way too far afield for my abilities to help you. I mean, you're going into all these other areas, Enochian literature, Amarna, all these. I mean, you're welcome to go there. I have limited myself to a very specific period, the period of the scrolls and the period of the birth of so-called Christianity and the war against Rome. And I don't really feel that I can branch out into all kinds of other areas that I'm not expert on.
All right.
So obviously,
did you hear about them finding a Roman garrison in the Valley of Megiddo here within the last few years?
Say that again?
They found a Roman garrison or the ruins of one in the middle of the Valley of Megiddo in the
Well, you're
last
talking
couple of
about
years.
the Enoch Israel. Megiddo
Yeah.
is just one of the towns in that valley.
Yeah.
What's surprising about that?
Well, it's
Garrison the
they
whole
said that
country.
they never had any warfare in that area. The so-called
What,
historic.
in Galilee? In the
Yeah.
Galilee? I mean, Megiddo's in the Galilee area.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Josephus talks all about the Galilee area when he went up as a sub-commander and all the fighting that was going on up there.
Mm-hmm. How
Talks about that in his.
how truthful do you think he was about his description of Yotapata, if you remember anything about that? That Vespasian got wounded there, and Josephus himself absconded from that area. He places himself as a hero of the
Well,
battle.
yeah, well, you know, I mean, I'm sure that if Trump is writing, he's going to place himself as a hero, or Obama, or any of these people, they're all going to make themselves the heroes. That's quite normal for people to do. He thought he wouldn't have done what he did if he didn't think he was the hero. But we don't have to judge him on his opinion of himself. He presents himself as a fairly treacherous, double-dealing person who's willing to tell any kind of lie in order to save his skins, like they're all in the cave supposedly, and they all agree to commit suicide, which was something the Zealots did. So with that, I think we can credit as authentic. But then he and another one cast the lots, and it's quite clear that they fixed them. And you know, he doesn't say it, but anyone can see it. And they killed the other, and then they went out and surrendered to I guess it was whoever was leading the Roman forces up in Galilee there at that time.
Nicanor.
Well, whoever it was, I'm not sure it was Nicanor. Anyway, the point is that he went out and surrendered, and he proclaimed, you know, I think it was probably Titus or Vespasian. Probably Titus. Anyway, he proclaimed him. He applied the star prophecy. He knew the star prophecy was very important. A world ruler would come out of Palestine. So he proclaimed. He applied the star prophecy to the Roman emperor, the future Roman emperor. So since he predicted the rise of this new Flavian Vespasian family, he was treated like a wonderful person. But we would consider that a flatterer, a traitor, you know, a totally a person who has no morals and no backbone. But the episode is very interesting that we should have it at our fingertips to be able to analyze it. It's better than not having it.
Oh,
I mean, I'd like to have it.
What you're saying is
somewhere where I can get some true historical credibility about this particular person. I'd like to have some really intimate details about these kind of characters, and that's an intimate detail about Josephus. We can, as I was telling you, one of your other listeners, read through it and correct it and make it properly historical. We can say, oh, look at this guy. He's a total turncoat traitor. But that doesn't mean the episode didn't happen. And now we can understand how he survived, why he went to Rome, how he probably helped even write the Gospels with some other people who were also there. People like Paul. You know, Paul was in Rome at that time, and people like the person who sponsored his own writings, as I told you, and some of the Herodian family members who Paul greets at the end of his letters, Agrippa, and the little Herod. And we know that the little Herod that he's speaking of died in the eruption of Vesuvius in Pompeii. That's really interesting. These characters really come to life. So all these things are important. We can get a milieu of people who can help us put the assemblage of people who would have been involved in creating this kind of new material with a pro-Roman, pro-Pauline slant. But certainly it's not Jewish messianic, that's for sure. It's taking the Jewish messianic idea and turning it into a Christ.
Herodian died at Pompeii?
Yeah.
Is that like Herod the Fifth?
Probably, I don't know which number, but
Okay.
he was not an old person. He was just probably someone in his teens. I don't know how old he was. Yes.
All right.
His family was living there or something when the eruption occurred. He died with many of the others. I don't know all of the details, but you can look it up.
You didn't mention one fellow's name the night before last as being complicit in the Christian church in the time of Domitian and Josephus. I'm talking about Epaphroditus. And
He's Josephus' editor. I did mention him, not by name particularly.
no, not by name. I'm wondering if, because they had a close relationship, and you brought up the other night again that Josephus had dedicated his witty to Epaphroditus, I think.
Yeah, and in Philippians, I think Paul mentions him.
Yeah.
So we have a connection right there between all three of those people. Josephus dedicates his one of his works to him. Paul sends him to Rome. Paul he's an apostle and a companion of Paul. Paul sends him to Rome. He rises up in the imperial ranks. In fact, he's involved in the assassination of Titus. We know that Titus needed someone to hold the sword when he ran on the sword, and Epaphroditus was the one. And then when Domitian wanted to get rid of Epaphroditus in 86, sometime later, he had blamed him for raising his sword against the emperor and had him executed. So all these things are interesting things. You've got to put all these things together. You have to accumulate your data into huge mounds of data, and then slowly sort out a sensible picture for yourself.
Do you think it's possible that Epaphroditus had a hand in the composition that we call the Gospel according to Luke?
Of course he did.
Did you hear that?
Of course he did. He was the secretary for Greek letters for Titus, and later on, for a while under Domitian, until Domitian got angry about something and executed him. So yeah, sure. And I think it's the same Epaphroditus that Paul was running around with. Yeah, Paul had entree into the highest circles of the Roman imperial world, and so did Josephus. So we've got some very powerful literary personalities here.
Absolutely.
We don't know how Paul died. Some people say Paul came back to Palestine. Some people say he went to Africa. I don't know, or he was executed. We don't have any real solid data about the last we hear he's wandering around Rome at the end of Acts. But we don't have no one is angry at him when he lands there. He says, they've not heard anything about him, anything negative. So I mean, he's totally free. So we don't know. We don't know anything about what becomes of him. But I'm sure all those people know each other in Rome and get together, and Epaphroditus puts people to work writing things, as we see from Josephus's work. So I don't see any reason why they couldn't have been working on some of these other materials.
Well, he's a good candidate for the writing of,
of course, I've said that
gospel.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not just him. It's Josephus. It's some of the Herodians. It's Paul himself. It's some of Paul's. I mean, there's quite a few people who there. Agrippa too is in Rome. Agrippa too has been exiled to Rome, and he's a perfectly horrible person. The revolutionaries hate him. They want to kill him, and he escapes to Rome with his wife's sister, mistress, Bernice. So all these people are very powerful and very well placed, and have a lot of influence, and are very connected to the Roman imperial powers. I mean, you have a lot of intelligent, knowledgeable people there ready to go to work on something.
Not just a poor tent maker.
Huh?
Not just a poor tent maker.
Well, I don't know anything about tent making. That's something that nickname, I don't know. I can't relate whether people had nicknames. I mean, I could call you Jackson the Pollock. I don't know.
Hey, I'm not the Pollock here, Robert.
Anyway, the point is that, I mean, so what? Someone's a tent maker. What's that got to do with anything?
Nothing. Is there any other questions for wanting to get him going on something?
Well, I'll just take one more thing. Just one more thing. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off.
Okay. Okay, he's got one more thing. Yeah?
All right.
Got one back here? Here's a question.
Hey, Rob, can you hear me?
Oh, he can't hear you.
I'm listening.
Here comes Bishop Ben Regesh to ask you personally. Okay. Come right
Who?
here. Bishop Ben Regesh.
Hey, Rob. Dr. Eisenman.
Okay.
Dr. Eisenman, how are you?
Got it.
You got it? Can you hear me?
Yes, he can.
Don't hear you.
Okay, Dr. Eisenman, this is more of a, I guess, it's not necessarily a historical question, but
Maybe tell Jackson and he'll tell me.
what? What are we in the United Nations now? Okay. What I want to know is how he sees Israel in the rebuilding of the third temple. Does he think it's going to happen or no?
He wants to know what you think about a rebuilding of a temple in Jerusalem. I know you mentioned that before.
Immediately. It's in my poems. It's in this book I just read.
Right.
I just read this book to you. I was already talking about it 50 years ago. That's the first thing you tell me. What do I think about the 6-Day War? I think the Israelis screwed up everything. Okay, if I were in their position and I had been attacked, and the Lord had been so gracious as to give me all of my previous lands that I had long yearned for 2,000 years, you think I would have negotiated and given them back to anyone?
No.
I mean, the mandate for Palestine was divided into 3 nations. It was divided into the Israelis, the Palestinian, and Jordan. But Jordan was part of the Palestinian mandate, and Jordan didn't exist. The British tricked everyone in 1926, cut it away from the Palestinian mandate. In the original mandate, there was enough land for both Arabs and Jews. Jordan was a Palestinian state, but they cut it. The king of it was called Transjordan. The king of they brought a king up from Saudi Arabia because the British felt guilty about the house in Mecca that they hadn't given anything to. So they brought someone from the house of Mecca there, the Hashemites, up to this Transjordan, gave him 2/3 of the Jewish Palestinian mandate. Well, the Palestinian state is in Jordan. So what would I have done in 1967? I'd have said, okay, you folks, you attacked us. Now, you called in the Arab armies. Now, if you want to live in peace under our rule, period, you can stay here. If you don't want to live in peace under our rule, you have another state right across the Jordan River, 3 times as big as ours, called Jordan. Jordan is Palestine, and I would have let them all go there or come to America or wherever. Be one of these dreamers. I don't mind. But the point is the Israelis should have taken what they conquered, annexed everything, not made it a question, annexed everything that they don't annex Transjordan, leave that to the Hashemites and the Palestinians to do what they want with, taken Jerusalem, taken over the Temple Mount and rebuilt the temple. Yes, it's all in my early poetry. It's all there. And of course they should still be, and they should be, but they aren't because they can't agree on anything. Because when you have 2 Jews in the same room, you have 3 opinions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You know, you either have a strong sense of history, you know what the Lord has commanded you to do, and you do it. And the Jews, the Israelis, they had the opportunity in 1967. They had it again in 1973. And they let Jimmy Carter talk them out of everything when he came in 1975, and he talked the Sinai out of them. They had a beautiful settlement down along the Red Sea there that everyone used to go for vacations and skin diving, and they built this beautiful place down at the bottom of the Red Sea. And Jimmy Carter talked them all. You think I would have let that anti-Semite talk me out of all these things? Never in a million years. If you have a clear sense of who you are and what you are, you don't give up what? And they gave up the oil in Sinai? They had to beg the Egyptians for oil. Everything they've done is almost pure stupidity. So, I mean, I'm not saying Jews are superior race by any means. No, they're actually pretty stupid. I don't want to be quoted like that, but they can't agree on anything. There are stupid ones and smart ones, but they argue, and there's nobody to tell them what they should do. And I'm sad about that. And I wish I could have helped, but they surely weren't going to listen to someone like me either. So there you are. So we have this situation that's going to limp on and limp on. And it's going to go on long after all of us pass, and it's going to keep on going on. We're going to hear about the Palestinians, the Palestinians, the Palestinians till the end of time. And there never was a Palestinian. Look, are you kidding me? How many states do the Arabs have? 13, 14, 15, 16? What, there are 15 or 16 Arab states around the world, and there's no room for these few people from the West Bank there? When we bring into America millions of people every year, and they have all this oil money, they couldn't have resettled some of these people in their 16 states, and they need a 17th state. I mean, Palestine didn't even exist as part of the Ottoman Empire. The British invented the name because when they conquered it, they didn't know what to call it, so they went back to their understanding of the ancient history and took the Roman name for Palestina and applied that name. There were no Palestinians in the Ottoman Empire. They didn't exist. There were only Arabs and Turks and Syrians. There were no Palestinians. So the British created a Palestine, a Palestinian people, and everything. And so now we have this mess. So yes, would I rebuild the temple? Tomorrow.
Good, because that's the last question we have from the delightful Liz McGee, who wants to know how you feel this is all going to end up with Israel. How's this all going to...
A mess, as always. Everything is always a mess. That's how everything ends up. So I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe, even, as I said, the Israelis can't agree with themselves on anything. So, at the present time, Netanyahu doesn't do badly. I know Netanyahu. I knew his father. His father, I just mentioned it. His father vetoed me from a position at Cornell. I went to Cornell, and I was supposed to teach there, and Netanyahu's father blackballed me. I don't hold that against Netanyahu. I think his brother was very, very brave, and Netanyahu isn't doing a bad job. But I know a lot of these people, and I've had experience of them. He's not doing a bad job. He tries to do the best he can. But I think Bennett has a much more hard-headed view of things, but he doesn't have the same support. So are they ever going to agree on anything? The Labor Party is never going to agree to any of the things. They're not going to rebuild a temple. If you're kissing a wall that Herod built and the Romans and Herod built, and you're still kissing it as the wall of your temple, the so-called Wailing Wall, well, you don't have a lot of brain. I wouldn't go near that wall. I wouldn't touch that wall. If I was an honorable, self-respecting, proud Jew, I would actually, don't be upset if I say, I would spit on that wall, not because of the temple, because of the people who constructed it, because I know the history, that the Herodians constructed that temple in order to placate some of the Jews under their authority and that wall. No, we want a proper temple, a proper Zionist righteous temple, and I'd get up there on the Temple Mount. I wouldn't let anyone stop me. I wouldn't be kissing some Herodian wall. I'd be up there on the Temple Mount, getting to work even with archaeology, finding the place that the old temple really stood. And if that was a problem for some people, you might step on the wrong place or the Holy of Holies or whatever. So if you didn't want to do that, I would build another building at a place that you knew wouldn't be a bother to anyone, and I would build a huge shrine there, more like a commemorative shrine, like a shrine of some kind that people would come and visit, not a temple, to commemorate the return of the Jewish people to Palestine, if you want to call it that, Israel, the Holy Land, whatever. I would build a shrine there to commemorate that, not necessarily a temple. In due course, maybe you could build a temple, but that's something that I'm not an expert on. But I certainly wouldn't be kissing any wall that Herod laid down.
Hear, hear.
Okay,
Hear,
guys,
hear.
I'll leave you with that very, very inspiring negative thought.
That was very inspiring, and I thank you so much. It was delightful again to hear from you, and we just love your stories. Delightful, except
Well, it's kind of you.
Bishop Ben Regesh wasn't
Not easy to
happy.
take And thanks for the invite. I think I don't have energy to do much more. So
All right.
we'll see you guys, and all of you be well. Have a good conference.
Best wishes to you all.
Okay, you too.